In addition to today's dressage competition and this weekend's competition here at Copper Meadows, there's also a small R course design seminar taking place. James, tell us a little bit about what that means and entails.
So obviously the licensing program through the USEF for all of our officials in this sport is really important, right? I mean, these all of our licensed officials run the events, basically. Our course designers, their education is so critical to how the sport is not only this country but throughout the world. And the USEA actually conducts the education portion of that. So yeah, we have a smaller course design seminar. There's actually one in Texas this weekend, but we had several people who are from the West Coast here and requested that we do something here at Copper Meadows, which I was really excited to do, actually. I think it's a great property for these guys to use. You know, it makes it a little more viable for them as far as travel, and a couple of the guys are actually competing and working at the show this weekend too. So they... If they complete this course, this seminar, then they are licensed to design up through training level. And then from there, they can move on up through the levels with significant amounts of experience and apprenticeship and testing. And then from there, they can go on to their large R, their FEI levels. But normally these seminars are with quite a large group of participants. This weekend, we just have the 4 guys. They all have quite a lot of experience in this sport. They've all, 3 of the 4, in fact, have ridden through advanced level. So these guys have a good feel for this sport. So we've really been able to focus in on some really critical parts of course design because these guys have such a strong background. And it's been really fun. Tremaine Cooper was here yesterday actually to design my 3-star course for the fall. And he does a fantastic job of educating these course designers and TDs and judges as far as cross country. So he helped us out with that a bunch yesterday. And my show jump course designer, Jose Nava, is also going to work with them this evening and tomorrow and speak with them about that aspect of it. Since the cross-country course designer is also ultimately responsible for the show jumping course as well. And our other officials this weekend, Jack Leary is the president of our ground jury, who he actually is the president of the chairman of the LOC as well. So, you know, for sort of pulling this course together pretty quickly, these guys have a great opportunity here to learn from really some of the best people in this country.
Well, we'll talk about a very unique exercise that James is actually putting them through here this weekend today in a second. But first, I think as riders, we don't really take a lot of time sometimes, or are guilty of at times, not appreciating everything that really goes into these courses. And it is an incredible planning process that takes place. Yeah,
very much so. I think, you know, being a course designer can be a thankless job at times. I mean, I hope that competitors, riders appreciate the days and hours that we spend literally agonizing over every one of these courses, from even the intro level and the beginner novice all the way up through the FEI levels and advanced, on every single fence. I mean, every jump that anyone jumps on a cross-country course has been placed in that exact spot for a reason, and it's been not just dropped there but messed with and tweaked and moved a foot this way or that way, and that's just a single fence. You know, and then the combinations, and you know, we literally, you know, I'll send my builders out to you know, take an hour out of the life of 3 or 4 guys to lower the front rail half an inch, or the time that's spent and the consideration that's given to this is unbelievable, really. And when you start putting together, you know, multiple complete courses, it's huge.
Well, these course designers have their work cut out for them, and every jump is very important to take into consideration, because at the end of the day, this is something very serious, and these guys going through those course design classes need to keep that in mind as well, because really what it comes down to is that people's lives are at stake if there's a mistake made, and each of these jumps is very, very important.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we have to, first of all, comply with the rules in every aspect, but there's so much more than that, you know. Yeah, the more you learn about this, the more you realize that there is to learn. You know, the more you realize you don't know yet. The smallest things, make a huge difference. And so the safety aspect has been paramount in our sport for quite some time, and that's where we start, obviously, when we're designing anything. But then so many other things. I mean, footing and warm-ups and facility layout. We've talked about that. Even the guys who joined us in the course this weekend had no idea of just the responsibilities that do fall upon the course designer. You know, they're the ones who have the relationship with the organizer. They're at the site early. They can actually make a difference and have a place that's going to function well during the show.
Well, now we'll talk a little bit about what James has tasked these guys with. They're going to have to put a course complex together here and then explain to James why they chose to do that and give us a little more detail on exactly what they're doing.
Well, so I think the most intimidating part of being a course designer is, you know, getting your first job or a new job, and you go to a site that you may or may not be familiar with, and you have to just go and start walking around and find a track that's going to work, and then find where you're going to put your combinations and what you want to ask at each one, and how to use the ground and the terrain in such a way that you're taking full advantage of it without having to create everything from scratch, and in a sense, you know, working with the terrain and working with the budget of the organizer too, right? The less dirt you have to move, the less you have to create, the more cost effective it's going to be. So just trying to prepare these guys for that a little bit, because believe me, it is an intimidating experience. We've just, as pretty much for the conclusion of this course, as far as the cross-country part goes, they've each been given about an area of about an acre, and I made sure each one has some terrain in it, some natural features, and their job is to create a preliminary level combination, and then describe to me why it's preliminary level, the size, the profile, the top spread, the base spread, the width of the fences involved. And then tell me where in the course is it? Is it the first combination, or is it later in the course, in the middle of the course? Is it right at the end of the course? Why and how that would change? And then how they get there, what the previous fence is, what the next fence is. And then they have to do some sketches for me that they could provide with a builder of reasonable experience, and he could produce exactly what they're looking for here. They're placing flags in the ground to mark their jumps, their walking distances, they're measuring. And then we're going to just go one extra step and have them tell me how they would change this to make it an intermediate combination, and how they would change it to make it a training combination, which is so much more than just dropping or raising the height, right? I mean, the concept at each level is very different, what we're trying to accomplish and what we're trying to ask and teach. So I think these guys are all going to do quite well with this. They're all sort of outdoor guys. They've, you know, all of them actually have done some course building. So I think they're going to do well with this, but it'll be really interesting to see what they come up with.
Well, we'll catch up with them in a few minutes and see what designs they did come up with and chat with them about that. But James, we really appreciate all you're doing for our sport and to further the education and the sport for the better in the future. So thanks so much for taking the time to catch up with us about this.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you, Frankie. So we have 3 of our participants here in the course this weekend. We're going to take a look at their designs that they've laid out for us and just ask a lot of questions about what they're asking, why they're asking it for the level, what their thought process is. We're going to talk about distances, shapes, sizes, all that sort of thing. So our first candidate is John Michael Durr from Woodside, California. This is his second time actually through this course design seminar. He completed one in Colorado 3 years years ago and is doing this just to polish up and prepare himself to move on to his smaller testing. So John Michael, show us what you've laid out for us here, and then we'll start asking questions.
All right, so the area I was given is from that rock right over there, kind of up through here, these trees, and then down to those rocks over there. So starting over there, the horses are going to come from this way on a pretty good clip. They're going to go through their first water. This will be fence 10 on the course, so they've actually done something already, and they're going to find, when they get there next to that oxer, they're going to find a pretty good size for the level table with brush on top with a little bit of a drop on the backside, and that's going to get them going. And then to reset them up, they're going to come up the hill through this turn here to this first set of flags. First set of flags here, and they're going to find a little 8-foot jumpable face skinny cabin. Then they're going to take 4 steps across here to a big old growth eucalyptus log between these 2 trees, with a 20-foot jumpable face that they're going to have to jump a little bit on the angle. And then they're going to carry on that straight line down right next to that rock there where those flags are to a chevron with just a little bit of a drop behind it and a nice even 6 steps, and then gallop off, and then off in the distance they're going to meet a tricaner as their next fence.
All right, so tell us a little bit about the previous fence. You say a table with brush with a drop behind. Is that in any way significant to the question that you're asking here with this combination?
Absolutely. They're going to see a little bit of a drop behind the triple brush, so I'm introducing them a little bit to the brush and the drop here, so they've seen it before they see it with the element of the skinny added. Same as they're into this combination here. It's going to have an 8-foot face, as well as that's going to be an 8-foot chevron, so they're going to have seen every element before they put it all together at the last element of the chevron there.
Right. I mean, I think that's a very good point. Yeah, we have to introduce these things one step at a time. We've talked this weekend a lot about questions that are appropriate for the level and introducing one new concept at a time to a horse and rider. So at preliminary level, you may introduce a water-to-water fence and you may introduce a corner fence, but it wouldn't therefore be appropriate to introduce a water-to-water corner fence, right? We would save that for intermediate once the horses and riders understand both of those concepts separately. So I think what you're doing here, where you are more immediately exposing the horses to both of those things, I think that's really, really good logic. Yeah, and I've seen that theory be very successful on a lot of courses that I've seen and courses that I've worked on. So the narrow fence coming in, or the 8-foot fence coming in, tell me about the shape of that fence, the profile, any top spread, and then the your log in the middle. Any reason for it being particularly wide, or what's your thought process there?
A little bit on that first jump in, it'll be just your kind of standard 8-foot box, little foot, about 4 foot wide, enough that they have to jump across it, but not enough that they're going to get in any trouble if they lose a little bit of their punch coming up the hill and doesn't jump across it. The reason for it being 20 foot wide is because I think it'll look cool, and I have that piece of material at home, so it's in my mind. And also too, it will be on the angle, and at preliminary I want it to be a little bit forgiving. They can move across the face of it to make up their distance. If their force stride isn't quite right, they can cheat, so to speak. And yeah, it's just kind of fill the space. It'd look a little naked if you didn't fill that whole space.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. What distance did you set this at?
The in is 4 strides. The out is 6 strides. So 60 feet and 84. Yeah, just right on a 12-foot step.
So I think my comment on that would be probably the cabin in to a log. I think that the 60 would probably work. Maybe just a little snug, just coming off a cabin. Keep in mind the horses aren't jumping the back half of that shape. And I think, considering the fact that we're going to a chevron and to a narrow, and just like in a triple combination in a stadium, the second distance is always a little bit longer than the first. I think you're going to find, especially if you have a 20-foot wide, big, bold-looking log, they're going to come up the hill, they're going to pop over the cabin like you suggest, they're going to move up to this, and then actually the horse is going to come out of there on a big step. And I think we want to probably, at this level, continue encouraging the forward, positive, supporting leg ride. So I think we would probably end up stretching that a few feet, even as much as 6 feet. I would guess.
I would go with that. My thought on keeping it short, I did have that thought, especially with the downhill, but I don't want the preliminary horses getting there long on a chevron, because that's where you see the runouts to the chevrons, is when they're having to reach that last step. So totally see your point, and that was my thought process, but who knows which way it would run.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a very good point too. I think when I'm walking distance to a chevron, I want to come out at the base of the chevron right here, right? So often when we're talking about distances on cross country, we're going from highest point, like we spoke about the cabin, to a chevron. I would almost picture the distance being to the back edge or to the brush of that chevron, because really you want their feet, as you say, right to the base of that chevron, right? So if we're talking to the very front and the base, it probably would work. I think you might still find that you would want it to be a little bit going, especially with that slight downhill. They're going to carry down that a little bit more. Other than that, I think it's a very, very appropriate combination. And I think we can certainly go into that now. Yeah.
Perfect. So for training level, where the table would be, it's going to just be a little steeplechase fence, so the shape of the jump is kind of irrelevant, just shows them a little bit of the drop. And then they're going to come around. There won't be any A element. The log, which was in my pictures, up on a little bit of a 4-inch chuck. The chuck will be gone. It'll be sitting right on the ground rather. So it's just a nice up and around, and then they're going to continue on the 6 steps, but instead of a chevron, they're just going to see kind of a brushy, almost bullfinchy without the height. Just a very introduce the skinny question without any real accuracy. Again, an 8-foot face, generous brush, just a very inviting fence with a little drop behind it. So again, you show them the drop, and then they get to have to be a little bit accurate in the drop, so there's a little bit of a test, but without really any major consequences.
Yeah, I think that's an appropriate difference to make, right? I mean, we're taking out the first element, we're allowing them to ride against something really wide, really big and forward, and then putting them on a related distance too. And in that situation, I mean, I think you can ask a bit of a question, particularly at training level. They're ready to start doing some stuff. You can ask, certainly the brush drop question, and even slightly the narrow question. I wouldn't be opposed to 8 feet even maybe for training at that level. 10 might be ideal. But I think you could work with something 8 feet wide too, with such a lovely setup fence. The terrain, the camber really lends itself to what you're asking here. So well done. For intermediate level?
For intermediate level, this would come into 2 steps, and I would actually keep the 6 strides there. Same setup fence, obviously. I think that would work, just obviously to height. And I would move the cabin into 2 steps, and I would keep the 6 steps, but like we were talking about before, it would be where the intermediate horses might meet it a little bit on the longer distance. I would definitely stretch that 6 steps a little bit longer, so they have to keep moving across the log and keep moving there. And obviously the profile of the chevron would be much more narrow and much more upright, where they have to get it right. And kind of invite the run out a little bit more, just by positioning of the degree of the chevron just a little bit, kind of away from that rock, just to kind of test that the riders can hold their horses against the line they're trying to ride.
And so just tell me your thought process on moving the first, looking at the terrain here, on moving the first element into a 2 rather than keeping it out on the 4.
For the preliminary, the hill gives them their canter, and I want to make sure the intermediate horses can hold their canter for another 2 steps, because I think they need to be able to control their canter stride.
I think that's exactly what I see with the terrain here, actually, right? The uphill to that fence is going to encourage the prelim horse to be lofty, jump up and around the first element, and allow them then to ride forward to the next. And that's exactly what I see. That's how that changes the question, right? Is that the ground levels out and almost takes you downhill a little bit. So yeah, and again, we would have to talk about the distance for a 2-stride, but for that concept is absolutely right. Yeah. So well done.
And I may tweak the box a little bit to make them have to hold their line, not so that the big log, they have to pick a point on the log, instead of, whereas the prelim, I want it to be a nice 4-step, so they can pick the point that's going to make their distance work. The intermediate, I kind of want to hold them to a point.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Well done, JM. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, sir.
We really appreciate these guys taking the time to showcase their work to us here at Copper Meadows, and wish them the best of luck and look forward to seeing their designs in the future.